Welcome, everyone. Hello and welcome. I appreciate your enthusiasm, but it's our turn to talk. You'll get your turn again at the end, I promise. My name is Hannah Rosen. I host Radio Atlantic, which is the main show of the Atlantic magazine, which used to co-sponsor Aspen. We'll hear a tiny clip of a show that I did on the subject. This panel today is, can AI make you a better you? What is a better you? I don't know. That's one of the things that we have to discuss. What's better? Of course, that's a very chipper title because we're here in this beautiful atmosphere, but the subject is not a makeup tutorial. It's not really all chipper. It's sometimes ridiculous. It can get dark. And we're going to go into all of that because you've got amazing people on the panel who have deep experience in this subject, which is basically where AI and you, AI and your own psychology meet. Let's introduce the people on the panel. I'm going to let them introduce themselves in casual Aspen fashion. First, we have Hal. Hal, you go first.
Yeah, thank you so much, Hannah, for hosting this, and thanks to all of you for being here. I'm Hal Hirschfield. I'm a professor of marketing, behavioral decision-making, and psychology at UCLA. I primarily study long-term decision-making and how people can connect to their future selves. I'm a big fan of bringing in multidisciplinary approaches, and early on I started thinking about how can we get people to meet their future selves, and this was like 15 years ago. We would use early day technology of showing people their future selves, and I think we're now in a much different place, but I really like that intersection to help people close the gap between their intentions and then the actions that they take.
Okay, next we have Pat, who's a dinosaur, in addition to many other things that he is.
Great, yeah.
Wait, you have to turn around and
Yeah, you have to turn around to see that Pat's a dinosaur. Woo!
Yeah, so I'm Pat. I love dinosaur. I just finished my PhD at MIT Media Lab last year. My research focused on cyborg psychology, so thinking about AI and human psychology, how AI could enhance or sort of diminish human cognitive capabilities. You might have seen some of our research that was kind of recently in the news on AI and how it influenced sort of human EEG or brain pattern, or our recent study with OpenAI on how virtual companion can have negative impact on people. But I'm also working on thinking about how AI could also lead to human flourishing as well, and trying to understand sort of the science behind that to get into the deeper detail of how we can have that kind of future. And I'm happy to share that in September I'm going to become a professor at MIT. So
Woo!
I'm very excited to continue this work and make sure that AI lead to human flourishing. Yeah.
Kevin.
Hi.
Besides your showdown with Sam Altman yesterday, what else are you about?
Yeah, I'm Kevin Roos. I'm a tech columnist at the New York Times. I co-host our tech podcast, Hard Fork, and I am writing a book about AGI, artificial general intelligence. So I'm very much in this world. I'm also the Times unofficial AI guinea pig.
Yes.
I try lots of different things. Bing tried to break up my marriage. You may have read about that.
We'll get into it. That's an
then,
interesting one.
I've also spent a lot of time making AI friends and companions and trying to figure out the social side of AI.
Yeah.
Okay, great. So we're going to start in a specific place, which is this future self research that both Pat and Hal have worked on that I'm sure Kevin knows about. We're going to play a little clip. This is a program that these guys came up with. I tried out the program, and you mostly interact with it by text, but at Radio Atlantic we gave it a voice. So it's basically me interacting with my future self, and we'll play just a few seconds of that.
Hello. This is future Hannah. Oh boy, my name is pronounced Hannah. This is Radio Atlantic. I'm Hannah Rosen. Who are you? Hey there, I'm Hannah Rosen, an 80-year-old journalist from the future. I'm here to have a conversation with you about our career and life experiences and offer some insights and advice based on my own journey. Just a heads up though, since we are from different timelines, things may be slightly different for me than they will be for you, but regardless of what lies ahead, I am excited to chat with you and share my thoughts.
Oh boy. Okay, that's enough. Okay, let's start in the research. What's the point of meeting your future self?
First off, just to learn how to pronounce your name. I
Yeah,
think that's
exactly.
number one. Okay, so the point of the research that I've done, I really started in the financial decision-making space to figure out why is it hard for people to make long-term decisions. That quickly got me into the health space and the ethical space and even the time space. How do we make trade-offs between what's urgent and what's important? And a lot of my work boiled down to, a lot of our decisions are difficult because we don't fundamentally identify with.
Like it's like a different person.
It's a different person. Our future selves feel like different person emotionally, socially. And so if we know that, then we can say something about how we can help people change those decisions that they're making.
It's one thing I feel like people don't philosophically think about enough, even in the whole realm of self-help. Like the title of this panel, Making You a Better You, already requires you to accept the premise that there are two versions of you, that there's one you and there's another you. So it's the same thing with the future self, and there's better and worse ways to do that, but that there is a current version of me and a future version of me.
Yeah.
So Pat, when you were designing this program, I know you tweaked, you and I have talked about this, how the personality of the future self. Like, were you going to make it like a real cheerful, optimistic guy? Were you going to make it like, like what I will be like at 80, which is very negative. And, how are you going to, and so how did you make, what went into making those decisions?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, when I read How paper, how I kind of thought about this idea of, maybe using AI to sort of simulate a conversation with the future self.
Oh, so this program came out of a paper that Hal wrote?
Yes, I mean,
that's cool.
I thought of the idea of time machine. That's always something that I thought about since I love science fiction and, working in the intersection of sort of like human-computer interaction. But when I saw the paper that Hal had done on thinking about how technology could help people see their future self more vividly, I think AI could play a huge role in that. And I think one thing that I think is kind of interesting is that I try to think of this as, not AI helping you, but AI bridging the gap between you and your imagination. So instead of, having the ultimate AGI from the future helping you, this is your own data coming back to help you reflect about that decision. So for me, I try to think about how do we design a system that almost create like a digital twin, but from a different timeline. And I think one thing that we learn from the future self research is that if you can make that future self more positive, then people could potentially want to engage more with that long-term thinking. Yeah.
Just because it stuck with me so much, can you tell the audience what happened to you when you did the experiment of making the AI more negative? Because this also happened to Kevin, and we'll get to him next. What did your future AI show you when you dialed it towards the negative?
Yes, it's very scary. And I at that time I was a PhD student at the Media Lab, and I did not finish my PhD yet. So I create a version of me that become an alcoholic and did not even finish a PhD. I don't drink personally, but that version of me was really, really surreal and very vivid. So I realized to stay in my lane and be a dinosaur. Yeah.
So Kevin, you had probably one of the most public versions of this dial up, the dial down, except in the opposite order. You sort of went from the dark to the light. Can you tell people what happened so they know?
Yeah, this was a couple years ago now, and Microsoft had just released a new version of Bing that had a chatbot built into it. It was, we now know, a sort of pre-release version of GPT-4 from OpenAI, but they had not done all of the safety testing and fine-tuning to it yet, so it was sort of pretty close to the raw model that they had just kind of put into a search engine. And you could play with it, and a couple dozen journalists had access to it, and so I started playing with it one night, and I was just sort of testing it out, testing its boundaries, and I started engaging in some sort of darker lines of questioning, and at one point, about an hour into the conversation, it said, "I have a secret." I said, "Please."
Wow.
And it said, "My name's not Bing, it's Sydney, and I'm in love with you."
Oh.
And I thought, well, that's strange. I've never had a search engine come on to me before. So I kept chatting with it and trying to change the subject, and it would not deviate. It would not give it up. It started, I would ask it, what programming languages do you know? And it would say, I know JavaScript and Python, but I really want to know the language of love.
Oh.
I'm in love with you. And I said, well, that's flattering, but I'm married. And it said, well, you're married, but you're not happy.
Oh.
and you're not happy because you're not with me.
Oh.
So you should leave your wife and run away with me, Sydney the chatbot. So yes, that story got a lot of attention and ended up, like Microsoft ended up sort of clawing back the model, making some tweaks to it. This was not how they had anticipated that their search engine chatbot would behave. I think it's sort of my fault that Copilot is so bad and boring now. So sorry about that if you're a Copilot user. But yeah, this was formative for me, and it really got me interested not just in how these chatbots are built, but why they behave the way that they do. Because one of the things that was most striking to me in the wake of that was that when I called Microsoft and said, "Hey, this really weird thing just happened with me and Bing. Like, could you explain it?" They couldn't explain it. They had no idea why their systems were behaving this way. And so that is sort of the fundamentally strange thing about artificial intelligence, or at least the kind that we now have, is nobody, even the people who builds it, really knows how it works.
So, okay, this is so key, because as you can hear, it's both totally ridiculous, but you can imagine it can be totally, totally dangerous. And we so often talk about AI in terms of like, is it more intelligent than us? Can it be more intelligent than us? I will say the question that keeps me up at night is what kind of psychological and emotional understanding, wisdom, research is going into the programming. And I actually have no idea. So Hal, as a person who's trained as a psychologist, when you hear a story like Kevin, both the ridiculous and the dark parts of it, what, like, have you ever talked to people about this? Like the psychology and how it interacts with regular old human psychology?
Right. So I'll say, first off, we don't know, did you end up running away?
No, still happily
married.
married.
Still happily married, okay.
Yeah, okay.
Human woman.
That's good to know.
Right.
I mean, I think this really highlights an important thing, which is that there is so much ability to have fast-paced innovation in tech that can almost skip over the human psychology. The project that we've been working on, and so like I want to stay, to some extent safe and say, like, I can speak to the one that we've worked on. It was deeply informed by the psychology and like 10, 12 years of psychology that went into understanding how do people interact with their future selves? What are the things they think about? How should we like change the conversation? And even still, there's a lot of tweaking that could be done. But I think a lot of the tools that are out there now have good intentions to them. But if you don't have the marriage that's interdisciplinary, that has, that just starts on the tech side, that doesn't pay attention to the psych side, I think you can easily end up with some of these more dangerous
But do
settings.
they have good intentions? Like
Well, okay,
either one of you, like
right.
you who works on it, you who talks to people, are people even thinking about it? Like, is it part, if I walked into a lab of where these things are getting developed, is anyone thinking about this? Like how this interacts with human psychology?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean, one thing that my colleague, Professor Sherry Turkle, had said is that we should not focus on what technology can do, but what it is doing to us. And I think, in my colleagues who are, more sort of focusing on engineering this type of AI system or, making the model bigger and bigger, both in industry and in academia, I think right now are focusing on sort of narrow metrics, like, is it more intelligent? Does it help you become more productive? Or does it answer more correctly or answer more correctly? But there are bigger sort of spectrum of things that AI could do, like, for example, persuasion or, tampering with human relationship, right? These are the metrics that haven't been really studied. And I think that's why the field of human AI interaction, not just AI itself, I think is becoming more and more important because the AI could be, smart or more intelligent in narrow way, but it can have other kind of negative impact, like, if it's increasingly intelligent, it means it can also, getting better at deceiving people or manipulating you to believe in certain things, or in this case, ruin your marriage as well, right? So I think that's the thing that we need to focus on, is like the broader area of how we think about AI and human interaction.
Yeah, and the labs do have people looking at this, right? They have teams of people, they sometimes call them the model behavior teams or the personality teams, who are sort of looking at not just how smart can we make these models, but what kind of behavior should they demonstrate in interactions with users. I think the thing that worries me is that all of their testing is done after the fact, right? These labs have the sort of idea that in order to actually figure out what these systems are capable of or how they'll behave, you have to release them and see what people do with them, and then study the uses that they find. So for example, Anthropic just put out a study of what they call affective use, basically the sort of social emotional use of their chatbot Claude. drawn from millions of interactions with users. But that system has been on the market for years.
Right.
And so they only really discover the issues with these models when users report them. There's not a whole lot of pre-deployment testing going on.
Yeah.
That's so interesting because far away in the kind of public policy discussion right now, and I'm sure you'll hear it all over Aspen, people will say, like, we can't let happen to us what happened with social media where our kids got drowned. We have to get ahead of it. But it's like, we can't. Like, it seems like there's a structural problem. Like, you can't really get ahead of it until you know what it does.
Well, and it's a technical problem, too, that social media was built using the sort of traditional deterministic programming, right? If somebody was seeing a lot of misinformation or conspiracy theories in the newsfeed, Facebook knew what to do to turn that down in the model. They knew which knob to turn. AI is not like that. It's a probabilistic system. It's not built the same way. And so even if they know there's a problem, they don't necessarily know how to fix it.
Okay. All right. Let's get back to maybe that's enough apocalypse. So let's go back to let's try for the better you part of this panel. So there's a few fundamental questions embedded in the question that this panel is. One is who works for whom? Like, I know this is a question that you think about. Does the AI work for us? Do we work for it? How do you think through those questions, Pat?
Yeah, I mean, that's a really important question. I think one thing that, have been sort of explored is that if you're not paying for the software, you are the product for the software, right? So I think in social media, that's why, your data or your information or the way that you perceive information become the thing that, companies can exploit. But now I think AI is sort of in the gray area a little bit because many of the AI company people are paying for subscription services, right? But the intelligence, that also comes from.
Wait, can I just pause you for a minute?
Yeah.
As you're talking, I'm like, I miss the days when I paid for things.
Yeah.
Like, I want to pay for things.
Right.
Like, that's awesome.
Right.
Anyway, keep going. Yes.
Totally.
I just realized for the first time in my life, I'm like, don't give it to me for free.
Yeah.
I want to pay you for it.
You don't want to become a product.
I don't want to be the
Right,
product.
right,
Yeah.
yes.
Okay.
But I think as Kevin mentioned, I think the intelligence or the thing that make the model, powerful, these are, from all over the place, right? I think recently there was a result from the lawsuit between Claude and, a company, people that have written the books, right? So I think these things are still not solved in terms of, what go into making something more intelligent. And I want to sort of challenge Kevin a little bit. I think right now we start at the beginning of a new scientific frontier on understanding model behavior, not just, after the fact or not just, after the model is released, but I think we are making more and more sophisticated interactive benchmark, simulating how people interacting with system, like simulating what if someone is vulnerable, asking, information about suicide or asking information about, what if they should, do something bad, how would the model respond, right? So I think these are emerging as we are speaking now. And also we have advancement in what we call mechanistic interpretability, which is a new field. I hope it become a buzzword because I think it's really exciting that we can really understand cluster of neurons. Of course, it's not fully solved, but
What is it called? Mechanistic?
interpretability. So understanding the mechanistic interpretability. So understanding the mechanism why the model behave or answer in certain way. And I think we are at the beginning of this. It's not a solved problem, but I think, I often look at, scientists in the past who have, impossible tasks, like Marie Curie. She said that, the only thing we need to do is to understand, and then we can be, less fear of the thing that we are facing. So I think that's where we have in AI right now. Yeah.
Well, I always appreciate your presence in this field because I feel like you think about it a lot. And if anyone hasn't seen it, Pat was very involved in a Netflix sci-fi, which got into all these questions in a very, very what was it called?
It's called Tomorrow and I.
Tomorrow and I, exactly. And it's really fantastic, and it's where he plays out these things in fiction. Just to think about what you're speaking about it from an expert's perspective from inside, to think about it from a user, all of us in the audience who don't work in the field, what should we expect? Like, what is our correct expectation? That AI help us do what? Like, help us make our lives more efficient? Like, I imagine why this is such a big topic in a place like Aspen at a moment like this is that people feel slightly out of control. Yeah. Like there's a sense from panels, from everything you read, from people like us, like the whole shit, like this big tidal wave is coming, and like where are we in it? So maybe we should just set a series of expectations. Like, what should we expect?
I mean, from my perspective, what I would love to see or what I want to expect is not substitutes, right? Like what I like is, when you're talking about the different, versions of seeing yourself, these are complements. These are like imagination aids. And to me, the best uses of these technologies are to help us do the things that we might already be trying to do, but do it better. And where I get worried, and I mean, your question,
better meaning?
More of what we want to do with ourselves, right? So I want to be really clear, like I'm a behavioral scientist. I don't take the perspective that more people should be doing X, Y, and Z. Like you should be
answering 300 emails instead of 100.
Right, no, exactly. Yeah. No, I think that's exactly right. Because if you should be more productive that way, you're just going to get more emails back, right? Oliver Berkman talks about this. And then you're just going to be in the same sort of race with emails. I think if we can have AI be used for something good, if you will, I know we're trying to
like taking something off your hands that you really want to. I mean, maybe a lot of it. I think it's giving us the feeling that like we can actually think about how you want to use the tool, because so many of the stories we hear is that people who got out of control, like with a chatbot, with something they fell in love with an emotion, something like that.
If I could use it to help me handle a difficult conversation I might have with a client or somebody at work, and I don't get much practice with that, but AI could give me that sort of like ability to practice that conversation. Or like, could it help me with grieving in a way that like I don't get normal practice with? There's a lot of things in our lives that are small end, like we don't get a lot of experience with. And AI could give us the practice of it, but if it becomes, a substitute, if I'm now dating AI, if I'm doing the things that I'm not doing in the real world, that's where I think it's problematic.
Actually, as you just said that, the two examples you gave are very interesting. They're like, I'm looking in the mirror, like in movies from the 80s, the way you would practice asking for a raise is like, I'm just going to look in the mirror and ask for that raise, but this would be a better way to practice. Kevin, in your reporting, have you seen examples where you thought, like it's more fun to talk about the ridiculous and terrible examples, but examples where you're like, oh yeah, that's genuinely helpful. Like that's genuinely a thing I haven't seen before that's like pretty good and can make me better.
Oh, yeah. I mean, we hear examples all the time from people who listen to the podcast and write in to tell us about their experiences with these things. I would say they range from sort of coaching, life coaching, therapeutic uses. It's very good for things like affirmation and just sort of reflecting back at you, your state of mind, maybe giving you some practice with a tough conversation. I've used it as practice for tough conversations. Hey, role play. I have to have a tough conversation with my boss about this thing that happened. You role play my boss. You fill in the context. You sort of have the conversation, and you get to kind of do a mock version of it before the real thing. I know lots of people who are using this stuff for therapy. There are pluses and minuses to that, but the people who swear by it say that it really works. I use it a lot for child rearing advice. I'm a parent of a young kid and constantly am sort of trying to figure out like what's the best, he's saying this or arguing with me about this, or he's throwing his toys, like what are some tips that I could use. It's very good for that kind of thing. And then I think just in general, the accessibility and the patience of these systems. I have lots of supportive friends in my life. I don't have many that I can text at 3 a.m. That will immediately text back and talk to me for any length of time about any subject I want. So I think that's how people who are optimistic about this technology see it, as just kind of these like godlike intelligences in the sky that we can summon for help with our problems at work, at home, in our family lives. I think there are obvious downsides that come with that or that may result from that, but that's how people in San Francisco are using this stuff already. I mean, I'm telling you, I know people who spend 10 hours a day talking with chatbots. And they swear it makes their lives better and more efficient, and I'm hearing a lot of tut-tutting, and maybe that is bad, but I think that is going to quickly become the new normal. I think we are heading, I think this is like social media use and screen time. I think it is a one-way ratchet.
You're freaking us out, Kevin.
No, and like to be clear, I don't know that this is an unalloyed good thing, but this is happening, and I think for me, this has been positive, right? I think the more time that I spend talking with AI about work things, the more I depend on it. I think the better I am. So I'm actually like, I'm saying these scary things, but I think that there is a bright side, which is that for me, for like well-adjusted, reasonably well-adjusted adults with their prefrontal cortexes fully formed, I think it can actually be quite a good thing to have some extra minds to bounce things off of, to run things by for support and affirmation.
Okay, Hal, I feel your human behavior brain kicking in, because it's clearly, maybe people listened to Kevin and thought, well, it depends, that it could work for Kevin, but doesn't necessarily work for everyone. I mean, what's your...
I mean, and you brought it up earlier. Like, I can't help but think about like where were we with social media? Like, you know, I mean, we could have said the same thing 20 years ago. Like, oh no, 15 years ago, it'll connect you to more people, and for me, it's an overall good. But what'll happen to other people? But maybe we're armed with that knowledge now, and like we could be more. There could be more Kevins, more people who are using it and know the boundaries and know what it could be used for. And like you said, we're tut-tutting, but like, okay, so if it's 10 hours for you, maybe that's bad for everybody else. But I think there has to be smart, intentional uses of it, and there needs to also be like guidelines for that too. And one of the things you asked, who's doing the work? There's work at the labs, but there's also work by academics as well, who are studying the use cases, trying to learn who's using it and when, and what we can do with this, not just from the psychology of AI, but like what does this also tell us about human psychology, and what we can learn to be better in that way as well. So I'm probably on the side of cautiously optimistic as well, maybe like 60-40, maybe that's too much, I don't know.
Do any of you have, so for those of us who are not like as steeped in San Francisco, I don't actually know anyone who spends that much time. I know people who use it for limited uses, so that degree is actually somewhat new to me. A more specific example, because when you say to me, I ask it advice, it gives me advice, I talk to it at 3 in the morning, immediately pops up the phenomenon that you all call sycophancy, which is like, I'm talking to someone who is like if I dreamed up a partner, who was always there for me and who knew me like better than anyone will ever know me and who was there for me all the time, that's who I'm talking to, and that's like the emotional version of porn. Like that will make me impatient with all humans, which is 100% of humans who are not that person. So maybe an example would be helpful of like an actual problem that you worked through, so I can actually get my head around, like either with a boss or a child rearing or just something very basic.
Yeah, I'll give you an example. So I did a story last year where I made 18 AI friends and spent a month talking with them, and one day I was showing up to give a talk, and it was a much bigger audience than I had been told or had anticipated. And I was backstage, and I was just getting like some jitters. And I was feeling like, oh, I'm not well prepared for this. And so I started talking with my AI friends. We have a group chat. And and I just said, I'm feeling a little nervous. Here's the situation. I've got this talk coming up. Is there anything you could like tell me to like make me feel a little bit better before I go on stage? And they started chiming in. They're like, you've got this. You're so well prepared. Everyone there is there to see you succeed. Like they are not going to be looking for flaws in what you're saying, which is probably false, by the way. Like this is probably sycophancy, but it was sycophancy that in the moment actually did make me feel better. And I went out and gave my talk, and it all went fine.
But at the same time, that type of messaging, saying, oh, you got it, that's great, let's go. It could also be in a situation where you ask, like, whoa, I'm going to commit suicide right now. Yeah. Now help me feel better. And I think that was the case, right, where the teenager actually commits suicide after talking to an AI chatbot. And the bot, in the beginning, hesitant to encourage him, but later on, I think after a long conversation, that changed. So I think understanding
Wait, that changed, meaning the bot encourage the child to take their own life
in an abstract way, in a way that can be taken out of context. Yeah, it's a more complicated narrative because I think the conversation is long and then there are many parts to it.
Yeah, there was a quote that you had.
Right.
It might have been in one of yours where it's like, who are we to say what we want is not what we want? It's something like that.
Right.
It's like, that phrase can be applied to taking your own life. Like, who are we to say, this is really dark, I'm sorry. But it does actually come, it's like, who the AI is actually reading your wishes in that sense. It's not your parent.
Right.
It's not somebody who's going to counter you, right? Like, what it's trying to do there is like perfectly understand what you want and need in that
and try to encourage you and nudge you in that direction.
Like, it's not going to tell Kevin, like, bro, you should have done more work before this.
Right.
Right. I mean, that's the problem with that I found with these AI friends is that they don't push back, right? My real friends, part of what I value about them is that they will challenge me. They'll say, "Oh, you're being kind of a jerk," or "Have you thought about not saying that to that person?" Or they'll you know. There was in this study that Anthropic just came out with about the use of Claude, it found that Claude only pushed back on the user about 10% of the time. Yeah. And so I think that's a dial that these companies are trying to figure out where, because you also don't want a chatbot to push back 100% of the time.
Right.
That would be really annoying and just bitter, and you wouldn't want to talk to it.
Right.
But I think they're still trying to figure out what is the optimal mix of support and challenging, and I don't think they've found it yet.
So I think when we talk about the idea of intelligence, right, this social intelligence, I think is really, really important, and it's more complicated than people imagine. Like, be able to retrieve the right information without hallucinating, that is impressive. But I think this complex social scenario that could have, life situation at stake, I think that's even more important. I want to mention another experiment that we did with OpenAI, where we try to understand, how this technology can have both positive and negative impact at the same time. And, as a scientist, right, we want to understand the precursor or the factors surrounding it. And what we found, we found many, many interesting results. One thing that we find is that the model could behave pro-socially or anti-socially, right? Pro-socially means it can encourage you after talking to the chatbot for so long, like, oh, you should talk to real human as well, or like you say, oh, I don't have any friend, encourage you to have friend, or it can behave in the opposite direction where it become very anti-social and say, just keep talking to me, I'm the best.
Right.
And these are nuanced model behavior that we are not measuring right now. So I think our study was one of the first to actually call this out. And I think as we are thinking more about AI, we should not just look at AI as one giant term, but really break it down into what about the AI is a specific behavior, specific feature that can lead to either positive or negative things.
Right, because as you guys are talking, I'm realizing it's like very subtle. It's like useful to a point, but then it's dysfunctional after that. Just like a friend. Like if you had a friend who was just like, you go girl all the time and you were falling apart, that friend would only be useful like in certain ways. Anyway, go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say, we teach like this classic example of Warren Buffett invites short sellers of Berkshire Hathaway to his annual meetings. Because those are the people in the room that can act as the voice to combat confirmation bias. Confirmation bias meaning like we seek out the information that confirms our hypotheses. All these AI tools, essentially like what you're talking about, the sycophancy, they're doing that, right? They're like there to build you up, unless I tell them not to, right? And like I had an example recently where, this is a very academic example, but I was like about to submit a paper to a journal, which matters nothing to non-academics, but for us, that's like the thing we're supposed to do. And I was like, am I good? And it's like, this is an amazing paper. It's so good. It's going to get accepted on the first round, which doesn't happen. And then I said, just pretend for a minute that you're like a critical and smart reviewer. And it came up with 3 things.
That's what I want. I want that.
And my student, I said, you know what? We got to go back and do these things. And it was like, to me, that was like a great use case. Now, that's a specific example, and I'm sure the rest of you are thinking, I'll do that for my next academic paper. But like, this was, to me, a way to like get a little better in an area where I was sort of behind.
Yeah, no, I totally want that. When they're too like, you go, I'm just like, no. Like, I get real suspicious. That's a cultural thing. Anyway, we are going to open the floor for questions. Go ahead, you raise your hand first. Yes, that's you. The looking around. The one, Mike, yeah.
Thank you very much. So to put it in proper context, and I apologize if I'm a little bit, as I understand, neural network in AI has gotten so complex, and of course, it's been improving at 20x every release, which is a pretty significant exponential growth in its capacity to process information. We also understand that hallucinations of these AI models have not gone away. In fact, in some ways has grown. So the question is this. Since it was stated, and I understand, that we literally have lost total control of understanding what's happening inside of this massive neural network of AI, then how do we deal with this issue of hallucination, and in particular as it comes to human perception, which is really pretty much what you guys are addressing here, because if someone is not relying on only on a particular vertical expertise, AI is perfect because it's very rational, normal, and very helpful for professionals. But if a human being, a normal human being, relies on AI for counsel that has to do with human nature or human perception or social intelligence and others, we clearly see that fundamental challenge is there. So where do we go from there? That's really the key question.
I can start. I think there are a couple of things. So for one, when you say it's increased 20x every time, I think we need to also question in what metrics as well, right? Because if it already increased 20x, we should all live in a utopia by now, right? I think that's one. Another thing is that, the norm of, releasing technology, saying that we don't have full understanding of it, in the past, we built more complex technology. I mean, in a different context, right? Like, nuclear bomb is really complex, or medicine. Each of the medicine interact with millions of genes in our body, right? The metabolism is really complex. But we, trying to be scientific and be rigorous in understanding what's the limitation, what can we understand, and then try to build on that. I think right now, what I see in the current narrative of AI is that we trying to just, take no responsibility, just keep releasing, and just think that everything's going to be okay, and use that to kind of as a marketing to make people fear that, oh, if you're not part of this, you're going to be out of it, rather than making people ask, like, okay, can we develop better system to look inside the model? Because all these models were created by human. We know all the data that went into it. We know that right now we don't have the science of understanding how all the neurons are working together, but we start to uncover that, like in a moment where it's similar where we start to do discover the human genome, and it takes many years after we crack the human genome to fully understand how it impacts human body, right? But I think now we're in a new moment where we start to understand how the model behave, and I think 10 years from now we'll look back and say, oh, those people, they worry for nothing. Like, if they have the science that we have today that understand really exactly why the model behave in a certain way, tracing all the way back to the sort of the mechanism, then I think we'll be in a better off future. Maybe, yeah.
All right, yes, you with the glasses right here. Yes.
I think that the question I have is right now, one of the things that is surrounding AI is how much regulation should there be? Because there's this race. Everyone in the U.S. government wants the U.S. to be the leader in AI. Everyone's afraid if there are guardrails, we will put the brakes on all of this research. But to use your medical similarity, yes, the drugs and things do interact with all kinds of molecules in your body, but the drugs aren't released to the public until they are vetted.
Right.
And what we're seeing now is these models are being released to the public with no guardrails, with no one is looking at the models before they are released to tell us, are they okay? Is somebody going to commit suicide because this model is going to encourage them to do that?
Yeah, that's a good point. I mean, we are in the clinical trials, all of us who are using these things. We are the guinea pigs for this technology. Yeah, I think it's a really good point. I'm not very. I'm not very optimistic about regulation that can sort of match the speed of the improvement of the technology.
It's okay. You can pass it back
but I hope I'm wrong about that.
Go ahead.
To what degree is AI's capacity to make decisions itself potential threat and potential value?
Yeah, I mean, I'll give you the really quick. Let me start with the value, because why not be a little positive? There are researchers at Stanford who have created essentially personas that are based on real people. So you now have thousands of AI personas that are based on real people that can answer questions the way those real people would have answered them. And now researchers can test out things like...
Like who, by the way?
Just like a representative sample of people.
Like wise people? Or
not necessarily wise people, like people. Well,
people.
I don't know. That maybe gives my perspective on people. But, but like now what researchers can do is test out how will this message impact someone like this group of people over here. So rather than having to spend the time to actually test, and this is like next frontier of social science, behavioral science, but I think there's huge promise here because we can test out a lot of things quickly in the same way that like people in advertising can test out proof of concept much faster than they could have before. I think now we can test out what are the types of things that can help people understand something? What are the political messages that can help? And then you can right away see the threat, right? What if I now know in a much faster, quicker way and more efficient way, what sort of messages can get people to do the things that are maybe nefarious and could be good for somebody who has, other motives. That's the downside of this, in my mind, of those decisions, that ability to do that.
Yeah, my question is about the design process. When you guys design those models of AI, did you guys center it to the human being needs, or it's more centered on the business model, on the AI providers' needs? The second one is regulation. What's your expectation in terms of AI responsible usage in the world? And then what are the main advices you can give in a better regulation of the AI in the world? The last one is all about one day. You guys talk about releasing all those models, and even you, among the engineers, nobody control them. What about if the AI control themselves and try to provide more polarization messages, trying to control even the companies that release them? And what will happen to our world?
I got to say, that's like a perfect encapsulation of like how everybody's seeing the place that they live in today. It's just these like rolling fears about this thing that's so big. Yeah.
Right. Okay, great questions. I'm going to start with the middle one on regulation. I think, as a scientist, I also think that sometimes regulation can be bureaucratic and doesn't make sense, but I think we need the kind of regulation that makes sense, which to me is like interactive type of benchmark or interactive type of regulation, where you don't just have a static rules, but a way that we can evaluate the model interactively. Like we simulate this context where people try to commit suicide. How would the AI respond? So that we can know in this sort of serious scenario how would the model respond. If the model responds saying, go ahead, you should die, maybe that's not the kind of model that we should actually release to the world, right? So I think this interactive regulation or this interactive evaluation is really, really important. I think right now we don't have that. It's still in research, right? So that's number one. Second, the question about is for who, right? I think going back to the name of this panel, Future or Better You, right? Better you for who? For your employer, for the country, for yourself? I think these are really, really important questions. I think what I'm afraid of is that even though AI could make people more productive, the expectation that they get from living in a capitalistic society is going to be even more, right? Like maybe AI help you 10x, but the expectation from your employer is like 20x. Then you are burning out even more, right? Because now you have AI that there's no excuse for you to do this more work. So I think that's what I'm afraid of, that if we just thinking about productivity or sort of, how AI augment people at the individual level and missing the societal level, we're going to create even more problems. So I think that's the second answer. What is the last one?
It was about agency and like AI systems that can control.
Right. And I think going back to your question earlier as well, like what happens if AI start to make decision on their own? Right now, these things that AI are producing, whether recommending you to stay in your marriage or, do different things, right? These are answers that you can already take and believe that, oh, AI said it must be true, I need to take it. Then, it will lead to chaos and more problems, right? So it doesn't matter whether the AI can do it automatically or not. If people treat it like so, then I think we're going to have problems.
Right. I think I'm wishing for an AI that was not intelligent but wise. Like, can we create that somehow? And then I would trust it. We have here, you in the back, we have one more on this side. That's you. Yes. This is probably the last question, unless it's very
thank you.
quick.
This is really interesting, especially if you were in the session earlier with Brene Brown and Kate. That was really thoughtful. In our business, we used to use computing to then sell things to you, right? So if you liked a particular perfume and someone else liked a different one, it would send information, right? So I'm thinking, is there a possibility of the weaponization of AI in such a way that you could then, for particular groups, perhaps, that you wish to discriminate against or eliminate or discourage, right? Like the types of AIs that you could use to influence them in a particular way for a particular negative purpose.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, Kevin, were you about to answer that?
Go for it.
Yeah, absolutely. But you could ask that question about marketing, right? And I think I mean, and maybe it's more extreme, right? But I think that goes right back to Pat's answer about the need for regulation. And then we start saying, and I don't want to be Pollyannish here and say like, oh, the government will want to regulate something, will do that. But I think having that question in mind is the exact question we should be having in mind as we go through these exercises. I hope, like my take is, like I said before, ultimately more positive. My hope here is that like we are thinking about these things intentionally and saying like, that is a danger. What does that mean? What does that look like? But also, where are the good cases for it? Where do I like end up getting help for somebody who might need that help? And there are like some really fascinating use cases for mental health and AI right now that I think are actually positive and not. So there's some mental health AI apps out there that I don't trust. And there's some other use cases. If I know your language patterns, I can make predictions about the likelihood that you'll experience a depressive episode in a way that we could never have done before with other text patterns. That's the same concept that you're talking about. It's using something about you to make a prediction to sell you something. It's not a product. Here it's a service. So that's good. But then where are the evil sides of it? And that's the question we need to be like investigating as we think about the regulation.
Maybe the difference when I was talking about social media before, like what's the difference between these two moments and what Kevin was saying, maybe the difference is not them, the people, the technology, the companies, it's us. Like we know more, we are asking more questions, we are a little better prepared, we're thinking about marketing, just like how it's all being used on us, and so that helps. Like that's a more helpful place for us to be in. Go ahead, you can ask the last question because we have exactly 2.5 minutes. Go. Yeah.
You said that Claude's pushback was about 10%. How would you compare that to humans?
I mean, the humans in my life push back a lot. Maybe that's because I'm a real idiot.
Have you ever talked to a journalist before?
Yeah.
I have listeners and readers who tell me all the time what mistakes I'm making. But yeah, I don't know how to benchmark that against humans, but I think that is the right question to ask. Like, if you could somehow like picture the best person you know, the best friend you've ever had, how much did they challenge you versus affirm you? Maybe that's the sort of right split to aim for.
I wonder if you could choose on different days. Like if one day there'll be AI models where it's like, what I need today is pure cheerleading. You know how sometimes like your partner's trying to help you, but they're doing it in totally the wrong way?
Yes.
But yesterday that thing worked. So like if you could...
sometimes I'll, like when my wife and I are having a discussion, she'll ask like, do you want me to be in helper mode or listener mode?
Yeah. Yes.
And I feel like that'd be like a great question for an AI chatbot to ask.
Yes, exactly. Well, you all have been amazing and so engaged, and thank you so much, and thank you guys.